Castle Grayskull will be mine. This is something that Skeletor says often. But why is he so fascinated with this castle? It's not like he is homeless. He has Snake Mountain for himself. So what is the basis of his obsession with Castle Grayskull? Since the beginning of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, this has always been a main point of conflict between our hero and villain. Skeletor wants the castle, and He-Man does not want Skeletor to get the castle, so surely there's something to be coveted about it. And so in today's video, we will look into Le Chateau d'Ombre and see what makes it so sought after. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you, and let's begin. What is Castle Grayskull? The decrepit old castle with a rather ominous-looking skull on it is the fabled Castle Grayskull. It is covered with ivy and muck, so it looks like an abandoned castle. But in reality, this castle is very, very important. It is on the planet of Eternia and acts as the central focal point in pretty much all of the various universes that make up the world of Masters of the Universe. The castle was said to hold dark power, enough to not only conquer Eternia, but the whole universe as well. This is the main reason why Hordak, Snake Man, and Skeletor launched attack after attack on this poor castle. Now, despite looking rather uninhabited, the Castle Grayskull is actually not empty. In the more recent years, this castle served as the home of the sorceress of Castle Grayskull. The first of this kind was Queen Vina, King Devon Grayskull's wife. She was followed by Kutuk Ungul, who was in turn followed by Tila Na. The sorceress that we've seen in recent years is Tila. But this does not quite explain why the castle is so sought after, right? In order to understand that, we have to know,
yet never enters or ever leaves Castle Grayskull.
the backstory of Castle Grayskull. As I mentioned, the Castle Grayskull has a legend surrounding it, but how did this legend come into being? We don't look at any random decrepit house and assume it has powers, right? So surely there must be a story. Well, it turns out that years ago, there were several wars in a faraway evil world known as Infinita. These wars came to an end when only two factions remained standing and decided to nuke each other with their ultimate weapons. This action led to an interdimensional portal opening which pulled the two leaders of Infinita to Eternia. Now, with new land to conquer, these two opposing leaders joined hands and waged wars against Eternians. Luckily, the Eternians were able to fend off the Infinitan conquerors, but now they knew that they weren't as safe as they thought they were. So, the Council of Elders of Eternia created the Castle Grayskull to safely keep their knowledge until there was a new champion who would be worthy of all that knowledge and the powers that came alongside. Originally, the place they chose was known as the Hall of Wisdom, the storehouse where they kept all their secrets safe. To ensure everything was kept safe and sound, the elders concentrated all of their powers and created something known as the Orb of Power. It was a huge crystal ball that was placed in the Hall of Wisdom. Thanks to the power of this orb, the Hall of Fame was disguised as the Castle of Grayskull. About 500 years ago, King Grayskull used to live in Eternia in his castle with his children Dr and Ro. He was trying to teach them how to use a sword to defend themselves, but this training session was cut short when the Snake Men decided to attack the king with their newfound ally, Orlax of Primera. Orlax was this magical creature who was able to show up in two different dimensions at the same time. It traveled to Eternia 500 years ago before the time of He-Man and met with General Hiss and his Snake Man. Now, Orlax was not a bad guy. He wanted to communicate with them, but he was able to form very deep psychic bonds when he tried, which the Snake Men realized could be used against the king and his family. This led to the attack that we see in the first issue of Masters of the Universe Revelation, which came out in 2021. Now, Orlax was unstoppable. None of the weapons available were strong enough to damage him, so based on the urging of the elders, King Grayskull forged the Sword of Power. This sword was made by mixing his Preternian weapon with a blade he made from the Subternian dark ore. Once merged, this sword proved to be the strongest weapon against Orlax. The sword cut off his limb the next time time he showed up to attack. Not only that, but the Grayskull family also got help from He-Man, who traveled back in the past to defeat Orlax. It was He-Man who asked Grayskull to hide the Hall of Wisdom to ensure it was no longer attacked. Grayskull was extremely grateful to this stranger, who showed up out of nowhere to help him. So he used his powers to disguise the Hall of Wisdom and turn it into a castle with a helmeted skull. In honor of the king, the castle was now named Grayskull Castle, with a Hall of Wisdom buried deep within it. The castle was a hot spot for attacks and whatnot. So over the years, many people devoted their lives to protecting the castle from evil. We have the sorceresses who stay in the castle to protect them from the inside, and we have the heroes who wield the sword of power and protect the castle from the outside.
At the center of the universe, at the border between the light and the dark, stands
Different adaptation history of Castle Grayskull. Over the years, there have been several, and I mean several, adaptations of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. Because of the vast number of reimaginings, it comes as no surprise that the origins of the Castle Grayskull were revamped several times throughout the years. Let me give you a quick rundown of those different origins. The original series had a set of mini-comics about them. In these mini-comics, the Castle Grayskull understandably played quite a crucial role. Here, it was said that the castle was made by unknown beings who made a castle way before the Great Wars. The Great Wars were a series of wars by the end of which all technology was wiped from Eternia, so if that is true, the Castle Grayskull is the last of its kind. It is the last remaining piece of the powerful ancient Eternians, and it makes sense why Skeletor is after the castle if that is true. Because if this is the case, then by gaining the two halves of the power sword, Skeletor would have the key that opens Castle Grayskull to him. This would give him every right to be the king of the castle and the powers that come with it, which is more than enough to rule Eternia as well as the whole universe. In the TV series, however, the origins of Castle Grayskull were a bit different. Here, we see that the castle is considered to be a legendary place. Right next to the lush green evergreen forest, there is a barren land. Right in an unassuming abyss, there was the Castle Grayskull. The castle is placed on a pedestal that is made out of bones. Here, too, this serves as the home of the sorceress, and whenever He-Man and his friends are in serious trouble, the castle acts as a safe haven for them. The origins of this castle are not well known, but it was always made evident that it was constructed to protect a source of power. As this is the source of power, any and every force of evil on Eternia targets the castle in hopes of getting the powers to do their own bidding. Most of the time, we do not get to see the Castle Grayskull from the inside. However, on the rare occasions we do get to go inside. We see that there are quite a few notable rooms there. You have the main chamber, which includes the walkway of the elders, the den where the sorceress stayed, the bed chambers, a lab, a hall of He-Man, the portal chamber as well, and a mirror room. There was also a particular chamber that had the secrets of Castle Grayskull within it. It was a room with two doors. They looked quite similar, but what lay behind the door could not be more different. One door had secrets and the other only had destruction. Right between these two doors, the Guardian would sit and await, ensuring no evildoer managed to learn about the secrets of Grayskull. It was also mentioned that in the castle, there was a place where two magic swords, that is, the Power Sword and the Sword of Protection, were kept. It is evident that the castle is surrounded by an abyss, which, like mimosas during happy hours, runs bottomless. This abyss also acts as a moat, and there is a drawbridge which comes out of the lower jaw of the castle's mouth, and so it's called a jawbridge. Whenever Prince Adam transforms into He-Man, a bunch of sparks shoot up from this abyss and go towards his sword. We get a good look at this particular phenomenon when Teela falls into the abyss in the episode titled Into the Abyss. So we can say that if we wanted to venture to the center of Eternia, the abyss would be the way to go. This castle is inherently magical, and the portal chamber inside it has doors that lead to several places around the whole planet, including Snake Mountain and even Eternia. 1987 was a year of joy for the He-Man fans because they finally got to have a live action of their favorite action hero. In this movie, the castle is finally captured by Skeletor and his minions, and this ominous scene is depicted rather nicely by them having a victorious march across the throne room of the castle. But despite that, the live-action depiction of the castle is vastly different from its animated counterpart. Here, the throne is right in the posterior section of the room, and the marble foundation of the room seems to be incomplete. The incomplete section simply ends abruptly into the abyss, which basically gives the room 4 gaping holes with barely enough space for catwalks. The posterior part of the room is lined with several statues of the elders, and the anterior section of the room opens to a hallway with several columns columns along each side. As Skeletor was victorious, he did not just throw the sorceress out, instead he trapped her in an energy field right next to the throne. This energy field siphoned her power, bit by bit, and fed it to him. This castle started acting as its main base of operation. In the movie, we see that the Castle Grayskull has a huge circular portal called the Great Eye of the Galaxy. This portal only opens whenever Eternia's moon reaches its zenith. Instead of working like a transport medium, this portal, when opened, gives whoever stands in front of it great godlike powers. But this required a key, and that key was the Sword of Grayskull, which was supposed to be inserted into a small column that lay near the portal. The Castle Grayskull was described as the center of the universe in the opening narration of the movie. Not only that, this castle lay right on the border between light and dark, but this meaning was never expanded upon. This live-action castle had a vastly different architecture. As most of you have already figured, we rarely get to see the exterior of the castle as the story takes place inside it. However, that does not mean that the outside is any less fascinating than the inside. The original castle was rather ancient, green and gray in color with masonry and stonework. This version is made of marble and has a golden tan color, which in my opinion lowers the ominous vibes that the original castle always boasted. A huge difference in this castle is that, unlike the original, this one is surrounded by an actual city. So from that, we can conclude that the Castle Grayskull in live action also doubled as the Royal Palace, with the unnamed city around it being the City of Eternos. What was really disappointing about this version of the castle was that the drawbridge, along with other important facilities that we have grown accustomed to, were not included at all. But that is alright, because in the 2002 remake of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, the lore and the purpose of the castle were expanded upon. A significant change in this remade castle was a huge crystal chamber. This chamber could only be accessed through a secret door, which was in another secluded chamber. Now, you might wonder why the crystal chamber is so important. Well, in this crystal chamber lay the Orb of Power. The Orb of Power is where all the elders had put their powers for safekeeping. Not only that, but this room also acted as the home of the Power Sword before it was given to Prince Adam. Other rooms of this castle that we get a sneak peek of are the throne room, a massive library that would make Belle blush, a huge mirror that is mystical and can show both the past and the present, and a coliseum. There was even a secret chamber in this castle that was dedicated to King Grayskull, and the area behind the eye sockets of the castle acted as a facade to confuse the intruders. This castle used to be made out of White Castle back in King Grayskull's days, but now it no longer retains its previous glory. That is because after the devastating battle that King Grayskull had with the army of Hordak, the castle fell into a state of disrepair. Over the years, the castle was forgotten, and its true purpose was forgotten by most except a select few. This castle was also surrounded by the abyss that we saw in the original, bringing back the drawbridge.
Said, by the power of Grayskull.
Is Castle Grayskull the source of He-Man's power? Even though we, as fans, would love to sit here and think that the power that He-Man wields is his own, the reality is far from the truth. The power he wields is not his at all. He is simply borrowing all of it to protect Eternia and Castle Grayskull from the evildoers. The Castle Grayskull acts as this hub of knowledge and a source of overwhelming power. The spirits of the wise elders who built the place are preserved in the Castle of Grayskull. Along with the spirits and their magical abilities, the Castle Grayskull also acts like the store of knowledge, science, and, if you want to put it this way, magic that looks like science and vice versa. The one in charge of Grayskull is the sorceress. She is the magical protector of the castle, while He-Man is the physical protector. Whenever things are touched, He-Man calls upon the powers of the castle, which are granted to him by the sorceress. His sword, the Power Sword, can be considered to be the interface of whatever knowledge the castle has. So when in need, the knowledge from the castle makes its way to He-Man through his sword and transforms him into the big and strong hero we know. So effectively speaking, the power that He-Man has is sourced directly from Castle Grayskull. That is why whenever He-Man has to call upon the power, he goes by the power of Grayskull, which serves as a reminder that the vast powers given to him are simply bestowed by the ancient castle.
All the forces of Grayskull, all the powers of the universe.
Why does Skeletor want to conquer Castle Grayskull? Since the 1980s cartoon, Skeletor has tried time and time again to conquer Castle Grayskull. In the cartoon series, he was the pupil of the high-ranking commander of the evil horde known as Hordak. Together, Skeletor and Hordak attacked Eternia and kidnapped one of the king and queen's children. Skeletor was caught by the royal palace and man-at-arms, which led to him telling them everything about Hordak and where they were from. This is where Skeletor divulged that they were coming there from the Snake Mountain Mountain, and if the royal guards went there, they surely would be able to find Hordak right away. When the royal guards cornered Hordak, he opened a portal and escaped with Princess Adora to Eternia. Skeletor remained in Eternia, made his own powerful army, and ruled Snake Mountain. Since then, he swore that one day the Castle Grayskull would be his, and with the powers of the Castle Grayskull, he would defeat He-Man, take revenge on Hordak, and eventually take over the whole universe. Now, when I say this story, it sounds like he wants to take the throne of the castle, right? It really sounds like Skeletor wants the castle for himself, but why though? He already has a roof over his head, then why? He keeps going on and on about how Eternia will be his and how Castle Grayskull will be his. Surely there must be a really good reason, right? Well, the reason might be quite different from what you're expecting, because Skeletor is actually not asking for unreasonable things. While he is a villain, his demands are pretty justified. Let me explain. There are Masters of the Universe Classics toys that have biographies printed on the back. Through these backstories, we learn that King Randor, Prince Adam's father, was not actually the firstborn of the royal family. The firstborn of the family was his older half-brother named Keldor. Keldor was half-Gar, a particularly blue-skinned race against whom the people of Eternia were quite prejudiced. When their father died, it was expected that Keldor would inherit the throne. However, something unexpected happened, and Randor's mother was killed. Keldor said that he had no idea what he actually did in his transformation that killed Randor's mother, but Randor was not listening to any of this. He knew that if he did not banish Keldor for his actions, the public outside would start rioting. They already did not like that a half-Gar might become the king, and now that the queen was killed, it gave all the more reasons for them not to support the royal line. So to save his neck and to ensure the public remained amicable with him, Randor banished his brother from Eternia. Keldor, who felt like this treatment was unfair and undeserved, vowed to return one day to get his castle and his kingdom back. To do so, he went ahead and dabbled in dark forces of magic, eventually becoming, you guessed it, Skeletor. This story of Keldor and Skeletor being the same person was something that the 2002 remake as well as the Netflix series that came out in 2021 agreed upon. In the 2002 series, Keldor transformed into Skeletor pretty explicitly. In the episode titled The Beginning Part 1, we see Keldor lead evil warriors to attack the Hall of Wisdom. Randor and the Masters managed to protect the Council of Elders and their Hall of Wisdom. In his desperation, Keldor threw a vial of acid to his enemies. Randor managed to shield himself from the acid, and that landed on Keldor's face instead. This shocked Randor to the point that he even expressed concern for his enemy, but no deeper relationship between the two was hinted at. In the flashback sequence of the episode titled Prince of Deceit, it was revealed that after getting his face burned off, Keldor realized that the only way he could survive would be with Evil Lynn's help. So with her help, he managed to show up in Hordak's sanctuary. Here, Keldor begged Hordak to save him, promising he would help Hordak in his endeavors. So, Hordak changed his face into the disembodied skull that we know so well. When it comes to the OG series from the 1980s, Keldor never showed up on the screen, but he was mentioned by Randor in one of his mini-comics titled The Search for Keldor. Here, Randor mentioned that Keldor was his brother who was obsessed with the forces of magic. He would experiment with the forces, and when his experiments backfired rather badly, Keldor was lost into dimensions beyond time. Randor joined hands with the sorceress to use the powers of the three towers to hopefully locate his brother, but to no avail. When Skeletor learns this, he decides to do everything in his power to ensure the heroes never learn what happened to Keldor, giving us a hint that maybe Skeletor and Keldor are much more related than they let on. So if the assumption of Keldor and Skeletor being the one and only is to be considered true, then his desire for Eternia and the Castle Grayskull is rather evident. He was supposed to be the one to inherit the castle, and with Randor banishing him, Randor effectively stole the castle and his kingdom from him. A close look into Castle Grayskull toys from the 80s. Owing to its popularity in the 1980s, it would have been absolutely stupid if the production house involved with He-Man and the Masters of the Universe did not cash in on the opportunity to sell toys. So they made a lot of toys, and I mean a lot of them. One of the most iconic ones has to be the Castle Grayskull toy set. This toy opens up like your very own He-Man Polly Pocket, which is absolutely adorable. I mean, I would spend my actual adult money on this playset. playset. Once you open it, you actually get 2 levels, which is great, and there are so many intricate details about the toy, it's absolutely bonkers. Right off the bat, this toy set gets a 10 out of 10 for me simply because it has the jaw bridge. The helmeted skull is molded to resemble stone carving, and at the bottom of the skull, we have the jaw bridge. The bridge is actually a shield that has skulls, bones, and swords on the outside. On the inside of the jaw bridge, the design is very reminiscent of a lower jaw with teeth. The jaw bridge also has small cubies that can be used to hold the floors along with other pieces of the model. The jaw bridge is hinged at the bottom, so there are no ropes or chains to see there. To lock it, you have to use a slip bolt that was present on the inside. The floor of the castle toy is made out of plastic, but it slides right into its place. While it may look just like a floor, in reality there is a trap door there, along with a throne. The throne can be swiveled around, and this swiveling triggers the trap door to open and close. Once opened, you can see that the trap door is green with a sheet of paper and the edges curling up. The throne, on the other hand, is a molded dark yellow plastic toy with a back paneling designed with printed paper. The top floor is green molded plastic strips as the floor, and they both slide right in the slots where the grooves are marked. You also get a card panel which shows a robot character. This card slides in a grip on the left side of the floor. Now, there's also an elevator that you can access once you open the top. This elevator is dark yellow in color, and you have a string to haul it up. The floor is cut perfectly so that the elevator can go from top to bottom. Now, one cool thing about this is the little eagle-shaped knob. We also get our very own weapon stand with various weapons like a shield, an axe, a pike, a spear, a sword, a club, and even a laser gun. There's also a cannon and a cannon support, which is crazy because, so if you're an 80s kid who missed out on your favorite He-Man toy set, I definitely recommend buying it to satisfy your inner child. Marvelous verdict. Castle Grayskull is the central hub of chaos and power in the He-Man universe, and there is no doubt about it. With the importance it holds in this universe, it is no wonder it keeps getting attacked so many times. I have a feeling that given the mystical nature of this castle, there is so much more lore about this castle that is yet to be explored. When it comes to Castle Grayskull, I don't mind the original idea being expanded upon. How about you guys? What's your take on Castle Grayskull? Are there any wild ideas or theories that you may have? Do let us know and share them in the comments right below. Because just like many of you, I am also a He-Man kid from way back in the 80s, and I just can't get enough of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. As always, if you like the content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.